Is this the man you want to marry? As beautiful as you are, wow, you must really enjoy poverty.
The words cut through the morning air like a whip, and the crowd gathered outside the Botha family mansion erupted into laughter, the kind that bruises deeper than any slap. Thando's mother, Nombula, stood with one hand on her hip and the other pointing at the man climbing off a bicycle so old its chain groaned in protest. Dust clung to his jeans, his shirt was torn at the shoulder, and his boots looked like they had walked every kilometer from Soweto to Sandton. Sifo parked the bicycle against the iron gate, wiped his palms on his trousers, and looked up at the mansion he was about to enter as a groom. The laughter did not reach his eyes, but it did not break him either. He had buried that kind of pain a long time ago, in a place even his fiancée did not know existed. 2 years earlier, none of this would have made sense to anyone watching. Sifo had walked into Hope Valley Clinic in rural Limpopo with a bicycle chain wrapped around his hand and blood soaking through a dirty rag, claiming he had fallen while delivering parcels for a courier company that did not exist. Thando, then a young nurse fresh out of training, had cleaned the wound without asking too many questions, because that was who she was, gentle with strangers and stubborn with everyone else. She did not know that the man wincing on her examination table owned 3 mining concessions and a logistics company with offices in Cape Town, Durban, and Johannesburg. She only knew he made her laugh when the clinic generator failed and the lights went out, and he had joked that at least the dark made his bicycle look less embarrassing. Sifo had built that lie brick by brick, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. His first engagement had ended the week his fiancée discovered the size of his bank account, and she had stopped asking about his day and started asking about his shares. He swore after that he would find a woman who loved the man, not the money, even if it meant riding a borrowed bicycle into clinics and townships pretending to be poor. Thando never once asked him for anything beyond his time, and so slowly, without either of them planning it, he fell for her the way a man falls asleep, gently, and then completely. Back at the gate, Thando stood frozen in her wedding gown, the white fabric catching dust from the road, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. Her sister Zanil leaned toward their mother and muttered something about disgrace, loud enough for half the guests to hear and snicker along. Her uncle Mfundo crossed his arms and shook his head slowly, the universal gesture of a man washing his hands of responsibility. "Thando, tell him to leave," Nombula said, not asking, commanding, "before the photographer captures something we cannot explain to the church." Sifo said nothing. He simply smiled, that same easy smile from the clinic 2 years ago, and asked quietly, "Do you still want me to leave?" It was not a question really, it was a door left open, and everyone standing there expected Thando to walk through it and shut it behind her. Thando looked at her mother, then at the guests whispering behind cupped hands, then at Sifo standing there covered in dust with nothing to his name but the love he had given her every single day since that clinic visit. She thought about the nights he had stayed late just to walk her home through the township when the streetlights were broken, about the way he remembered her late father's birthday every year without being told twice, about how he had never once made her feel like she was waiting for something better to come along. She stepped forward, her heels sinking slightly into the gravel, and took his dusty hand in both of hers, lacing her fingers through his without a flicker of hesitation. "I will marry this man," she said, loud enough for every laughing mouth to swallow its own sound, "exactly as he is." The silence that followed was louder than all the laughter before it. The reception hall still smelled like the lilies Nombula had insisted on, but the mood inside had curdled into something closer to a courtroom than a celebration. Guests sat stiffly at round tables, picking at chicken they no longer had the appetite to finish, their eyes darting between the bride in white and the groom whose boots still carried the dust of the road. Sifo sat quietly beside Thando, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand, the same patient gesture he had used 2 years ago at Hope Valley Clinic when she stitched his arm and asked why a courier was riding alone so far from any depot. He had told her then that he preferred his own company, which was true, only not for the reason she imagined. His real reason had a name, Nality. The fiancée who had once worn his ring proudly until she learned the ring came from a man worth more than the province she grew up in, and from that day she stopped asking about his heart and started asking about his portfolio. He left her a letter and a bicycle shop receipt and disappeared into ordinary life on purpose, trading boardrooms for backroads, just to find out if anyone could still love him without knowing what he was worth. Thando never asked, and that silence had become the safest place he had ever known. Back in the present, her uncle Thando rose from his seat with the slow gravity of a man about to deliver a verdict. He straightened his jacket, cleared his throat, and addressed the room as if it were a tribal council rather than a wedding breakfast. From this day, Thando is no longer a daughter of this family, he announced, his voice carrying easily over the clinking of cutlery. A woman who chooses dust over dignity has chosen her own path, and she will walk it alone. A few guests murmured their agreement, nodding like it was scripture. Zanil dabbed at dry eyes for effect, and Namvula pressed a handkerchief to her mouth as though she were the one being wronged. But across the table, Lindai, Thando's younger cousin, set down her glass with a sharp clink that made heads turn. Alone, she repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. She is sitting right there holding her husband's hand, surrounded by people eating food he is paying for, and you call that alone. The room went quiet in the way rooms do when someone says the thing everyone was too cowardly to say. Lindive turned to Saifo directly, her expression softening into something genuine, something none of the other guests had bothered to offer all morning. For what it's worth, she said, I don't care what you ride in on. You make her smile in a way none of these other suitors ever managed. Saifo gave her a small, grateful nod, the kind that said more than a paragraph could, while Mfundo huffed and sat back down, clearly unwilling to argue with the only family member still capable of shame. It was at that moment Mandla decided to make his move, smoothing the lapel of a suit that cost more than most of the cars parked outside. He had spent the better part of a year courting Thando's family rather than Thando herself, sending cattle to her uncle and gifts to her mother, certain that approval would eventually translate into a wedding ring. He crouched beside her chair, his voice low and syrupy. There is still time to think clearly, he murmured, glancing at Saifo with thinly veiled contempt. A man like this offers you nothing but embarrassment, Thando, while I can offer you a life without struggle, without whispers, without this. Thando's jaw tightened, and she opened her mouth to answer him with the sharp edge he deserved. But before a single word left her lips, Saifo's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at the screen, and whatever color remained in his easy, unshaken expression drained away in an instant. He read the message twice, his fingers suddenly stiff around the phone, and stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. I need a moment, he said, already walking toward the door, leaving Thando staring after him with her heart climbing into her throat. Outside, the gravel crunched under heavy tires as not one, not two, but 4 black SUVs rolled through the compound gate in tight formation, polished and silent, the kind of vehicles that belonged to presidents or kingpins, certainly not to bicycle couriers. Inside the hall, the laughter finally died for good, replaced by a confused, uneasy hush as every guest pressed toward the windows to see exactly what kind of storm had just arrived at their doorstep. The doors of the reception hall swung open, and Saifo walked back in, no longer alone, no longer dusty in spirit, even if the road still clung to his boots. Beside him strode a sharp-suited woman carrying a leather folder thick enough to be a small encyclopedia, and behind her followed 3 executives whose tailored jackets alone probably cost more than the wedding cake. The woman stepped forward first, her heels clicking against the marble like the ticking of a clock counting down to someone's embarrassment. Good afternoon, she said, addressing the room with the crisp authority of someone who had rehearsed boardroom takeovers far more dramatic than this. My name is Advocate Ntambai Kaya, personal counsel to Mr. Saifo Kumalo, founder and chief executive of the Kumalo Group. The name landed in the room like a dropped plate, shattering whatever composure was left among the guests. Namvula's handkerchief slipped from her fingers. Zanil's mouth fell open mid-sip. Mfundo, the same uncle who had disowned his niece 20 minutes earlier, suddenly looked like a man trying to remember if he had ever said anything kind at all that morning. The Kumalo Group, one of the executives added smoothly, owns mining concessions across 3 provinces, a logistics network spanning the country, and quietly, the very road outside this gate that Mr. Kumalo rode his bicycle down this morning. Gasps rippled through the hall, followed by a scramble of chairs as relatives who had been laughing the loudest now stood to applaud, to congratulate, to suddenly remember warm things they apparently always felt about Saifo. Mfundo even attempted a clumsy bow, mumbling something about misunderstandings and family pride. Saifo raised a hand, and the room obeyed instantly, proving rich men rarely need to raise their voices to be heard. The bicycle was never about money, he said, his tone calm but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut through every fake smile in the room. It was a test to see if this family could recognize a good man without a bank statement attached to his name. He turned to Thando, his expression softening the way it always did only for her, and nodded toward the advocate, who opened the leather folder and presented a set of documents bearing Thando's name in elegant gold lettering. As my wife, Saifo continued, Thando now owns a new home here in Santon and a fully equipped clinic back in Limpopo, named in honor of the woman who once treated a stranger's wounds without asking what he was worth. Thando's hands flew to her mouth, tears finally breaking free, not from humiliation this time, but from a happiness too large for her chest to hold quietly. Namvula stepped forward, already reaching for an embrace that did not exist 20 minutes ago, gushing about how she always believed in true love, but Saifo's gaze stopped her mid-stride. Respect that only arrives after wealth is revealed, he said simply, was never respect at all. He turned next to Mandla, who had gone visibly pale near the bar, his earlier confidence evaporating faster than the ice in his untouched whiskey. You came here pretending to court a woman while courting her family's approval instead, Saifo continued, his voice losing none of its calm even as security guards quietly flanked the exits. You are no longer welcome on this property, today or any other day. Mandla opened his mouth to protest, thought better of it the moment two broad-shouldered security men stepped closer, and slunk out through the same gate his SUV had probably hoped to drive through as a victor. With the air finally clearing, Saifo's expression warmed as he searched the room and found Lindive standing quietly near the back, the same place she had occupied throughout the entire ordeal, never seeking credit, only offering kindness. There was one person in this family, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear clearly this time, who treated me with decency before she knew my name carried a single zero behind it. He gestured for her to come forward, and as she did, blushing under the sudden attention, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out from beside the black SUVs, removing his driver's cap and smoothing his jacket nervously. Bongani had been Saifo's driver and closest friend for years, the only other person who knew the full truth of the bicycle disguise, and he had watched Lindive defend a stranger with a courage that quietly impressed him more than any boardroom negotiation ever had. Lindive, Saifo said warmly, meet Bongani, the one man brave enough to drive me into this lion's den this morning. Bongani extended a hand, his usual confidence replaced by something shy and unfamiliar, and Lindive shook it, her cheeks warming under a smile she did not bother to hide. That evening, under a sky exploding with fireworks paid for by a fortune nobody believed existed that morning, Saifo and Thando renewed their vows beneath an arch of white roses, her family watching humbled and quiet near the back of the garden, finally understanding that love had never needed their approval in the first place. Near the edge of the celebration, away from the cameras and the noise, Lindive and Bongani stood close together, watching the fireworks paint the sky in gold and crimson, their shoulders almost touching, their smiles shy but unmistakable, the quiet beginning of a love story all their own.